Hello, friends, and welcome to this really exciting members only video. I'm super excited about it. I don't know about you, but what we're going to be doing in this video is breaking down my personal process so that you can see hopefully the value in having a personal process. Now, I am not trying to force you to paint in this way. I am merely teaching you what I know and what I do so that you can kind of use that as a jumping off point for yourself to develop your own process. So, the reason I think that having a process when you approach every single painting that you can fall back on is because I believe that is what makes all of the difference between maybe a beginner who's not very confident in what they do and kind of propelling you toward being a much more confident artist who is ready to really start digging into some intermediate and maybe even advanced topics. Now, I know sometimes people, when they're newer to painting, it's hard for them because they have an idea of something they want to paint. They just don't know how to start. And I hear that a lot. Where do I even start? Here's the image I want to do. Should I start with this or should I start with this image? Or, how do I get started? Having a process is what helps you know exactly what to do, how to get started, and I think that that will help you develop your personal style. I get asked about that a lot too. How do I find my style? I don't think that you can really find your style until you have a process. Now, having a process, meaning having like a set of steps that you go through to achieve each painting, that might sound a little bit limiting to you, but I promise it isn't. And that's because you develop it. Now, if I said, here's my process, here's how you need to paint from now on, you have to follow this process, that would be very, very limiting. But with my process that I have developed for myself, I've been able to accomplish paintings from this one that's pretty simple that we're going to be doing today to this one that is one of my favorite paintings I've ever done, as well as these couple of paintings. I show you all those not to toot my own horn, but to kind of show you the diversity of images that I feel confident painting with the process that I have developed for myself. So I think that when you develop your own process, it may inform some of the things that you choose to paint. And again, that's going to help you develop your personal style, because the things that you paint are part of your style, just like the color palette that you choose to paint with. All of those things inform your style. So what I want you to do as we go through this video is I'm going to have chapter breaks where I want you to stop. I don't want you to sit and watch the video all in one go. I mean, obviously you can if you want. I can't stop you. But I recommend that you watch to a break, and at that break, actually go and paint. Put what we just discussed or learned into practice and really think about, how does this part of the process work for me? What do I like about it? What do I not like about it? Do I see it as being valuable for me and the way that I paint, the things that I want to paint? Maybe even write these answers down. Is there a part of my process that you feel like, this doesn't really make sense to me? It would make more sense if this. Write that down, because that's going to help you start to develop your own process. By the end of this video, I want you to have at least a little bit of a structure, a set of steps. I have 10 basic steps here for my painting. I would like for you to start kind of writing those down and thinking about what they might be for you as well. I do encourage you to do at least a couple of paintings following my process, simply because that will help you really think through it and decide what works for you and what doesn't. I have included a list of materials, including paint colors that I used for this painting. Please remember, this video is not making this painting. We are making this painting, but it's as a way to kind of explore the process. So if you don't have any of these colors, it doesn't matter. You could honestly grab random colors as long as you're paying attention to what's opaque and what's transparent. It doesn't matter if the painting looks like garbage at the end or not. What matters is, how do you feel about the different techniques and steps that we go through, and how might they work for you? So let's go ahead and get started with our first couple of steps. I've condensed them into their own section of the video because they're fairly simple. So let's go ahead and get started on our steps. Okay, in this segment, we are going to discuss step number 1 and step number 2 in my process, simply because they're both pretty quick, pretty simple, so I condensed them together. So step number 1 is surface texture, and this refers to the actual physical texture of your chosen painting surface. There's not a right or a wrong surface for you to paint on. There's not a best or a worst. It simply boils down to what you like painting on and the look that you want to achieve. So you might like painting on canvas that's just straight out of the package, or you might prefer a much smoother surface and to apply gesso and to sand each canvas before you start painting. Maybe even like a little bit of extra texture, and so you like to apply pastes or gels pretty liberally and get kind of an uneven surface texture. Whatever it is that you typically like to do, it's worth it at the beginning of every single painting to just stop and look at the canvas you're about to use and decide, is this surface going to work for me? Do I need to alter it? It might be just a momentary decision. You know, you're going for your canvas and you're like, need a canvas straight out of the package. Boom, on the easel. That's all that it takes out of your day to decide. But I do think that it's worth considering with every painting that you do. So here I had this 8x10 canvas already sitting out, and when I put it on my easel, I realized at some point I had gessoed it. You might or might not be able to tell there. So I decided to pull out a brand new canvas and kind of compare the textures. I typically will paint just on a canvas straight out of the package. Now here is the gessoed panel close-up. You can see the texture, but it is very, very smooth. It feels very smooth. And here, compared to the brand new canvas straight out of the package, it's got a good amount of tooth and texture to it. So that's why I decided to go with the package, or the canvas straight out of the package. For me, painting on a canvas straight out of the package is preferable because it's got a little bit of extra texture. And since I do a lot of dry brushing and scrubbing and layering to try and get this soft, misty look, I want a canvas that has just a little extra texture to it. A canvas like that first one that is very, very smooth, it's going to hold brush marks a lot sharper. So if you like that, if you know that you like very sharp brush marks that are very distinct, you might like working on a very smooth surface. If you like very foggy, misty, soft edges like I do, you're probably going to like something that's got just a little bit more tooth to it. Another thing that a very smooth canvas is good for is high, fine detail. So if you are going to be painting like hyperrealism and you're painting a portrait of a person and you want to render every single brush stroke of hair, you're definitely not going to want a toothy canvas, because that super fine line is going to end up being a little bit bumpy and broken, less straight and crisp. So just real quick again, at the end of this segment, please take a minute to think about the type of surface that you like to paint on and prep that for our painting today. I did use the brand new 8x10 canvas board, but you do not have to use that. I want you to use what you like painting on because that's part of your process. All right, now we're going to talk about underpainting. And the underpainting is always the very next thing that I do. It's the first bit of paint that touches my canvas. Always. I never do a painting without an underpainting. Because the underpainting, it kind of helps set the stage for your finished painting. So a white canvas can be hard to cover, especially if you're working in very thin layers and glazes. And there's nothing worse than having little white spots that you're kind of chasing around. And one thing I've found is when you are chasing around white spots, then you end up overworking areas where maybe those white spots are a little harder to get. And it can be really hard to build the color and the value meaning how dark or how light your paint is. It can be hard to build those dark values when you're painting on a white canvas. So that's just a couple of reasons why I always use an underpainting. And I cannot stress enough to you the importance of using an underpainting. Now, the color that you choose to use for your underpainting is really up to you ultimately. I do have a couple of rules that I personally follow when determining what color I want to use for my underpainting. Basically, I think about what colors do I want to show in the finished painting. And then I decide what's the complementary color of that, the contrasting color, what color's on the opposite end of the color wheel from that color. And that's typically what I'll go through or what I'll go to for my underpainting color. Also, I am never afraid to go bold, like extreme on my underpainting. And I know that that can be scary to you if underpainting is new for you, but I really encourage you to go for it. So, for example, if I'm using or if I'm going to do a painting that is very blue, the finished product, kind of like today's painting, I'm typically going to go with something vibrant and warm underneath. So cadmium orange, burnt sienna, even fluorescent red or fluorescent pink or something along those lines. If my finished painting is going to be very warm, so yellows or oranges, I don't do a lot of pinks or reds, but sometimes, then I will typically go with a much cooler underpainting. You could do ultramarine. That's a really great color to use for an underpainting. I will sometimes use deep violet. I like deep violet quite a bit. So anything that just contrasts the finished color. Wherever that color shows through your painting, and I highly encourage you to allow it to do so, wherever it shows through your painting, it's going to create some nice vibration of color, some interesting little bits of life to your painting. And all of those are going to go to kind of support your personal style. Another thing that your underpainting does, I kind of touched on this before, is it helps you achieve your darkest areas. So part of the reason that it does that in my process anyway is because, again, the contrasting colors. So in today's painting, I used an orange underpainting, cadmium orange, and that's because the colors I'm using for my darkest area make a really beautiful kind of jewel tone blue-green. And that blue-green layered on top of that orange time and time again, because they're opposites on opposite ends of the color wheel, they will make a very beautiful but rich and lively chromatic black. But rather than using black or Payne's gray, something that is a little more lifeless, the darks in my painting are going to be vibrant. They're going to be interesting. They are going to be much more complex. They're not going to be lifeless and boring dark spots in the painting. So I just want to show you a couple of my paintings and kind of show you the underpaintings or tell you about the underpaintings that I used on them so you get a bit of an idea. So in this painting here, which was kind of the starting point inspiration for today's painting, you notice the finished product is quite green, kind of a mossy green. I happen to have this photo of the process, and you can see the underpainting that I used was deep violet. And that, the green layered on top of the deep violet, really helped drive those dark areas, almost black. This painting here is very warm, very yellow, and the underpainting on it, again, was deep violet. And it's not a very good photo, unfortunately, but if you kind of look around the edges of the tree, you can see bits of that purple poking through. This one here, this is one of my favorite paintings I've ever done, this ragdoll painting. If you see here at the beginning of my process, my underpainting was hot pink. And I allowed a lot of that hot pink to show. If you look here, this is a close-up of the finished painting in her dress, around the edge of her hand, on the wood of the table, and even in this photo where you can see her face up in her neckline, there's so much of that hot pink showing through in places. And that is one of the things that I feel like gave that painting so much life, and one of the reasons that I like it so much. So please don't be afraid of crazy underpaintings. I would highly, highly encourage you to be bold with your underpainting. Do not try and pick a demure color that is going to have no effect on your painting, because I think that you will end up struggling to get your darks dark enough to maintain life in your painting. A little bit of a contrasting color peeking out here and there is just going to add excitement. I promise you it's going to work out. So to get started, here I'm loading up my number 12 filbert with a lot of medium. Always go to your medium first. Then I'm picking up some cadmium orange, and I'm just going to put a fairly even coat here. Really, my only goal is to get rid of all of the white specks. That's about it. Whether this color is even, like if it's a little darker on one side or lighter on one side, or if you can see brush stroke marks or any of that, I don't care. I only care about getting rid of the white specks and then getting rid of any like physical texture lines. Sometimes those lines in the paint can have texture to them that causes problems later on. So I just want to get rid of those and the white spots. And then I'm going to make sure that it's dry. That is another thing. I know I've told you about it before. You need to make sure that every single layer is dry before you move on to the next layer. If you are impatient and you insist on continuing before that layer is dry, matte medium can actually do a magic trick. If your paint isn't like cured, it can be dry to the touch, but if it still feels almost sticky, but it's dry, if you put some matte medium on that or even a little bit of water, it will re-wet, it will lift off of your canvas, it'll smear into your other paint. You're not going to layer, you're just going to streak and make a muddy mess. So do yourself a favor, use a hairdryer, or just walk away and make some notes about that part of the process. That is the end of this part of the video. That was steps 1 and 2. So please push pause, push stop, whatever. Go work on that part of the painting. Really paying attention to the process, not so much the finished painting. And when you're ready, let's move on to the next portion of the video. Okay, the next part of our process, step number 3, is our composition sketching. Now, the composition sketch is not setting your image in stone. It's not drawing your image onto your canvas. Think of it as more of a loose scribble. I want you to feel confident to really just kind of scatter all over your canvas. Remember that nothing you do at this point is set in stone, as long as you use your paint correctly, which we're going to cover. So feel the confidence to just discover where your image is on your canvas. Very loose, wild scribbles. And as you see something emerging that you might like, kind of chase that. This looks like it could be a tree. This looks like it could be a bush. There's a little opening here. Maybe it's a little house or whatever that is. Now, when I said that your composition sketch isn't set in stone as long as you use your paint correctly, what I mean is you want to use a lot of medium. Load your brush with medium first, and then just a tiny bit of paint. Wipe off some of that paint on your palette. Don't go to your canvas with big globs of dark, thick, heavy paint. Those lines are going to be very hard to get rid of. Transparent, thin, soft. That's how we're going to be able to cover up anything we don't like in the future. As far as what color to use, your composition sketch should be made in a contrasting color to your underpainting, but it should also represent the colors in your finished painting. So, for example, let's say that your underpainting is burnt sienna and you're painting a picture of like the interior of a house that has blue walls. You might want your glaze color, your dark color, your composition sketch color, these are all going to be the same color. You want that to be maybe a blue color, something that supports the blue that you want to see on the walls, but it's also a contrast to your underpainting. Now, I know that might kind of make your head spin. You will get more confident with those kinds of ideas the more that you paint like that. If you are super, super unsure, go with something neutral. So ultramarine with transparent burnt sienna. That's going to make a very soft, neutral color, very similar to Payne's gray. The reason I'm telling you to use that instead of Payne's gray is because it's easier to control. With Payne's gray, you get what you get. It's dark, it's neutral, it doesn't change. But when we use two colors, like the ultramarine and the burnt sienna, you can say, oh, I want a little bit more blue in this part of the painting. So when you do your glaze, you can shift it so it has more of the blue. Or maybe you want this part of the painting to have a little bit more warmth when you glaze. Shift it closer toward the burnt sienna. You can't do that with Payne's gray. So don't let the glazing part, like I said, make your head spin. You can go with the neutral colors, and then use a different transparent color to glaze with later. Maybe you want to glaze with green gold down the line. That's perfectly okay. So here, as you can see, I've got my phone set up on the easel. It's got the picture that I'm kind of basing this painting on, and I'm going to load up with my matte medium. Now I'm using Phthalo Turquoise and transparent burnt sienna, or PR 101, and I'm just mixing up a version of these two colors. I don't care if it leans one way or the other. I just care that it has a lot of matte medium in it. Now I'm going to come to my canvas, and I do have an idea of my composition, but I'm still going to just kind of start loose sketching everywhere. Just kind of finding where some shapes might be, the height and the shape of my tree, kind of trying to decide, do I want to make any major adjustments to the composition from the image that I'm basing this on, or do I feel pretty comfortable and happy with the basic shapes? But notice there's no hard lines, there's no thick globs of paint. I'm not being precious here. I'm not being tidy and drawing. That's the number one thing. I am not drawing my image here. I wasn't fully certain that I wanted to do a little house in this painting, so I'm just very loosely putting it in there. If I decide later that I don't want to do that, I can very easily get rid of it. Likewise, if I decide later I want to make it bigger or smaller, I can do that as well. But here, that's basically my composition. All of my elements that I want or think I want are accounted for at the end of that little clip. And that's really all there is to it. If you have a much more complex image, it might take you a few more minutes, but it's really just you getting the idea for where things are. Notice none of the paint that I put on the canvas was solid. There were no details. It's really just a scribbly mess. And as long as you understand that roadmap and how you're going to move to the next step, that's all that matters. Nobody else needs to look at it and be able to tell what you're going for at this point. So I want you to stop the video at this point and go spend some time with your composition sketch. Maybe even prep a couple of canvases and work on this one, and then work on this one, and then work on this one. One last thing to remember about this part of the painting is that composition sketch, whatever colors you decide to go through, you need to make sure they are transparent. That is so important. If those colors are opaque, even using the medium very thinly, it's going to give you a fit when you try to glaze with it later. And it's going to just obscure your underpainting color, and then your underpainting color isn't going to make a difference in the finished product. So whatever colors you use, make sure that they're transparent, and that when they're mixed together, they make a much darker color. All right, the next 3 steps, we have color blocking dark, color blocking light, and glazing. These 3 steps are going to be in this one segment because they work hand in hand, and I return to them over and over and over during paintings. How many times I return back to them depends on what I'm painting, how I'm feeling, how effective each layer is. So there's not a right and wrong. I do recommend you do it more than once because that's how you're going to get the most effective layering and soft edges, is by doing these sections several times. I think I do them 2 or 3 times in today's painting, which you'll see. With color blocking, I always start with my darks, and I'm using the exact same colors that I used for my composition sketch. So in today's painting, that is the Phthalo Turquoise and the transparent burnt Sienna, or PR 101. So now we're going to go in slightly darker, more paint, just a little bit less medium, and start blocking in those dark areas. You want to keep it still very transparent and soft, but you can start to build some of that darkness here with a little bit more paint. You should essentially have a, quote, black and white version of your painting when you're done with your dark color blocking. Go in there and get a nice layer of darks in the areas that you know you want almost black. Go in with a very soft, thin version into areas that you know are going to be not your brightest areas, but just have a little bit of shadow to them. Once you're done with your dark color blocking, you want to dry everything. Make sure it's dry. We're then going to go in and we're going to color block with our light color. Now, it's done the exact same way as we did it with the dark color. We're just using our light colors, and your light colors should always be opaque. Means you cannot see through it at all. These are going to be the colors that you actually want to see in the finished painting. So for example, if your sky is going to be like blues and greens, go ahead and start blocking in your opaque blues and greens into that area. If those colors are reflecting on the ground, get some of those colors in the ground. So really all of your underpainting should have something on it right now, whether it's your dark color or your light color. And when you're done blocking in your light color, I know you're going to look at your painting and be like, oh my gosh, this looks so horrible. It looks so chaotic. It looks like a child who has no idea what they're doing did this. And you might be tempted to give up or feel like you're doing it wrong. But I encourage you, don't. Keep going. That's just how it looks at this point, as you'll see in my painting too. Now, as you're doing your light color blocking, do not keep that color separate from your dark color. They should overlap. When you have your dark color, your light color should go over top of it a bit. When you come back in with your dark color later, it should go over top of your light color, and you should just have this back and forth build. That's again how we're going to get those soft edges. You can also come in and say, oh, I made this part too dark in my blocking. That's fine. Put your light color over top of it. You don't have to obliterate it. Just get some in there. And just like with your dark color blocking, transparent, use a lot of medium. You just want to say where those colors are going to be. You are not going to achieve the final color, the final look in a single layer. So don't even try. It's going to make everything look flat and uninteresting. Then the next bit is glazing. And glazing, I do get a lot of questions. What is glazing? What does glazing mean? What does glazing do? Think of glazing as going outside on a bright sunny day with a pair of pink sunglasses. When you put a pair of pink sunglasses on outside, everything is going to be bathed in that pink color. They're all still going to have their unique colors, and you might even be able to tell what some of those colors are, but now they're all washed in this single color. And that single color kind of brings everything together. Everything looks like it lives in the same world, kind of has the same, the same energy to it. And that's what the glazing is going to do for us here. So I always use my sketching or my dark blocking color for my glaze, but you can bring in other colors to glaze as well. When I glaze with that, it's going to start darkening my shadows. It's going to bring the underpainting kind of into the same family with everything else. And it's going to do the same thing with the light blocked color. So glazing is very, very important. And I glaze in every single painting that I do. How much I glaze, whether I'm glazing the entire canvas every time, that depends on the painting that I'm doing. So you may not find it necessary to glaze your entire canvas on all of the paintings that you do, but you might find it helpful. So for example, on today's painting, I glazed the entire painting several times over the entire canvas. Meanwhile, a painting like this one here, I may have glazed it the entire canvas the first time that I glazed it, but after that, I can almost guarantee that I didn't. But I would do spot glazes. So like I glazed the entire table, or I glazed the entire window, but I may not find the need to glaze everything all at once. You can glaze sections, however you need it to be. You can use thin, bright colors to kind of bring everything into the same color family. You can use dark colors like we're using in today's painting to deepen shadows or to kind of tamp down if something gets to be too vibrant. You can use glazing in a lot of ways, so I really encourage you to experiment with it. For me, glazing is one of those techniques that I cannot paint without. It's essential for me, and I glaze, whether I'm glazing little spots at a time or entire canvases, I glaze on every single painting that I do. So here we're going to get started with our color blocking, and I'm using the same brush, the same colors. Again, it doesn't matter if it leans more blue or more brown. I am going to pick up just a little more paint. And while I'm still mixing a generous amount of medium, it's a little less medium than before. And now I'm going to be a little bit more controlled with how I apply that paint, keeping it to the areas that I know I want to be the darkest. But see, I'm still leaving everything soft. I'm not painting the edges of trees right now. I don't know exactly where I want the edges of my trees to be. I don't know exactly where I want anything to be really at this point. So I'm not going to commit to anything right now. I did do a harder line right there for the edge of the house, but I am going to soften it, because if I leave that hard edge right now, then I'm married to it. It's going to be really hard to get rid of later. Not impossible, but I'm going to have to spend a lot of work getting rid of it if I leave it that hard. just indicating a little shadow on the left side of that little house area. The reason I'm not racing to get that hard line out of there, though, is because that is going to be the kind of the focus area of my painting. So I do know that I'll want a harder edge there, but at this point, I don't. More medium, much more transparent. And I know I want the top of my sky a little bit darker than the lower part of my sky. So I'm just going to scumble in some of this green color. And I know that green and orange, man, they look rough together. They do not, they do not look happy to be together. And it's okay. Dry all of it. That's my dark color blocking. And once it's dry, we can move on to our light color blocking. Lots of medium again, which honestly I ended up not needing. This color is very transparent, so I actually change colors in a little bit. It's not a color I use a lot of, so I didn't realize that even though it says opaque, it was pretty transparent. But for now, I'm just going to scumble it into the areas where I know I want this lighter color. And notice I'm just going right over top of the edges of my darker paint. Just right into it. And I don't think I picked up any more medium there. In the next layer, I use this paint without medium, and it's still very transparent. So yeah, know your colors before you start using them so that you don't find this color that you love and, oh no, it's pretty transparent and now I'm struggling with it. So even though I had harder lines there on the edge of that house, by overlapping it with my lighter color, it does help create a visual softening. Just one more generous streak of that blue on the house very loosely. And we're going to dry all of this completely dry because the glaze in the next step, like I said before, it can lift color that's not completely dry. Mixing up more of that color, I decided to lean it a little bit more on the side of blue because that's what I want to see in the finished product. Lots and lots of medium. And I'm just going to loosely cover the entire canvas. It is still going to look really messy. It's still going to look kind of chaotic and scary. But notice how it brought everything a little bit more into harmony. That orange underneath is more subdued, and it's starting to create a cohesive color in the sky and in my shadow areas. The dark in my shadow areas has darkened even more now with this glaze. And the light color it's not weird looking where it overlaps the dark color. It's a little bit more, they all kind of live in the same world, if that makes sense. So we're going to dry that really well again, and I'm going to keep color blocking. I typically will color block until I get to the point where I'm satisfied with the level of color and I know that I'm ready to start building on those colors and making them more substantial. You don't have to do it in the exact same order, but I am starting back with my dark color, and I am a little bit more sure about that house now, so I'm working on making some edges that are a little bit more solid just on that one side, because that is going to be kind of the subject of my painting. But notice I did go over them there to keep them ever so slightly softer. See how already those darks are starting to get quite dark. It's just green and orange on top of each other. Still soft edges, very, very soft edges. I'm still not 100% certain about the size and shape of this tree, if it's going to go off the canvas, how much of it is going. So I kind of play with the top and the side of this tree to figure out its shape as we go. Decided there's going to be like a little bush in this corner of the canvas, kind of obscuring the house a little bit. And the little bush over here, I'm going to keep the color blocking to the bottom portion of the bush and not... Same on the tree. I did not take the darkest, heaviest bit of this paint all the way to the edges because I want to say that the edges are thinner. We're seeing through the edges of the bush and the tree to the sky a little bit more. So I just didn't make them quite as dark on the edges as on the interior. Still no detail. Nice and dry, very, very dry. And notice how my brush marks are starting to kind of suggest some texture, maybe tree branches or leaves or whatever. That's another reason I really like to use those thin glazes. So back to my light color, which is just so transparent, man. Look at how transparent that is. So I just picked up paint. There's no medium in that, and it's still pretty transparent. But I'm just going to work with it for now. Still covering all of that sky, overlapping my tree, even working right into it. Helps keep a little bit of light inside of the tree so it just doesn't turn into a big black blob. Not terribly worried about brush marks in the sky because I know there's going to be a few more layers and that's going to obscure brush marks. Overlapping the bush again. Kind of defining where my horizon is. Where does the sky stop and the ground start? Right over that tree. Now, I believe I only do my color blocking 2 or 3 times, but if I were doing this painting for myself, I probably would hit that color blocking 3 or 4 times at least before I started moving on. I wanted to keep this video a little simple for you guys, so I didn't dig into the building and the details and everything quite as much as I would have on my own. I probably would have spent about twice as much time on this little painting if I were doing it for myself and not teaching someone. Right in the ground there too, notice it just kind of overlaps everything in the ground. But we're really starting to get some complex textures, shadows, highlights, colors, and all just from layering colors on top of each other instead of mixing. Dry again, lots of medium, leaning a little closer to blue. And I'm going to block in my shadows one more time. Look at how dark that's getting now. That's almost as dark as I need it. That's almost perfect right there. So see, as you revisit the steps, you can do them in different orders. You don't have to do dark, light glaze, dark light glaze. It can be in any order that you like. And as we move forward in the painting, if you feel like you need, you can absolutely jump back and revert back to these steps at any point in the painting. So later on, if you feel like, oh, I really need to make a change to this composition, maybe you've decided you don't want the house there after all. You can absolutely revert back to these steps and get rid of it or add something else in. Look at how nice and dark that shadow is. I mean, we're just 2 layers in and it already looks like a completely different set of colors, and everything about it is so different. Same here, and overlapping that dark right back up into the sky. If the images that you want to paint don't have quite so many soft edges, that's okay. You can still do hard edges in techniques like this, much like my painting of the table with the blue window or the doll. Those paintings have a lot of very distinct edges. Just glazing a hint of this color back over the top of the sky. So it's kind of a mix between the color blocking and the glazing, just kind of doing a spot glaze. And again, make sure that's very, very dry, completely dry. I've changed to a different color. This is cobalt teal. It's still a hint on the transparent side, but it worked out a lot better. One more color blocking in my light colors. So when I start looking at my color blocking and thinking, oh, I'd like to start pulling out the shape of this tree, or I'd like to start pulling out the shape of this element or that element, then I know that I'm done with my blocking and I'm ready to move on to the next steps. And as you can see here, I am starting to kind of fiddle with the edges of this tree. So that tells me I'm pretty much done with the color blocking here. And here on the ground, you see that I'm relying on the texture of the brush stroke a little bit more. So that's not so much color blocking as it is color building and almost starting to move into detailing, because I'm trying to get the impression of grasses. And here I'm starting to work on getting the idea of old weathered boards, trying to get some streaks in there. So this is about the last layer of color blocking. All right, get that super dry. And we're going to do our glaze. Again, I lean it a little bit toward the blue. And I'm going to glaze over the whole canvas. I felt like the colors in this painting came together so quickly. Depending on what colors you're using, it might not come together as quickly, and that doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong. Some colors just do that really well. So as you saw there, after just a couple of layers of our dark and light blocking and I think 2 glazes, and it's completely different. Now it's starting to read as exactly what we want in our final painting. It just doesn't have the details. So now I know that I'm ready to move on to the next section. So I want you to stop the video here, go work on your painting to this point. If it takes you more layers to get to the point where I finished, that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. Like I said, I would probably work several extra layers if I were doing it on my own. I don't think that it should take fewer layers. I think if it takes fewer layers for you to get to the point where I ended, you're using too much paint or too little medium. Just keep remembering to work very thin and very transparent. The benefit of letting the layers build is, like I said, you get more complex colors, values, shapes, textures. Those all come from the colors and the brush marks layering on top of each other. So take the time to work in several layers. All right, now we're going to move on to steps 7 and 8, and that is color building and detailing. And I work these two together here because they're very similar. Sometimes there's not a lot of difference when I'm working between color building and detailing. They can go hand in hand quite a lot, but also they are steps that you can again return to. You can build your colors a little bit, come and do some detail. You can go back and build some more colors. You can jump back to steps 4, 5, and 6, your color blocking and glazing. So let's go ahead and start with color building. What is that? It's basically the same thing as color blocking, except for a couple of key differences. So in this step, we're going to use less medium. And in fact, as we go toward the end, you may be using no medium so that you get nice and opaque color. We're going to apply the color thicker because this is where we really say, like, this sky is blue, and the area of the sky that I really want to have that glow, I'm going to put this color very thickly so that nothing underneath it shows through. And that's going to help focus our eye onto a section of the sky. We are also going to work in smaller, more precise ways. I'm going to use a little bit of a smaller brush. I'm not going to work quite as loose and skittery. And we're going to use the color to build light and shadow, texture, and to emphasize or de-emphasize points of the composition. Now in detailing, that's when we break out the smaller brushes, the short handle, soft bristle brushes. And this is where we're going to do things like tree branches, grasses, specific textures like the boards in the house. Essentially, if it requires a small soft brush and much more focus, that's detail work. And it should be reserved for close to the end of the painting like we're doing here. So here my canvas is dry, and I'm going to go down to my number 6 filbert. I'm going to get some medium. I just put it there so you could see how much. It wasn't a ton. And I'm going to mix up a pretty dark version of my paint. Notice I used a lot more paint than medium, and I'm being much more precise here. I know I want my shadow to be the very darkest right next to this edge of the house, because that edge of the house is going to be the brightest part of the house. It's going to create a lot of contrast. We're going to want to look right there where that dark, sharp edge meets the light, sharp edge. So nice and dark, really heavy paint right inside, feathered out toward the edge of the tree. Right here at the top of the roof, that roof line on the left is going to just melt into the shadow. It's just going to disappear into the shadow. And that the left side of the house is really disappeared into shadow as well. So nice and thick there. I also want this bush in the foreground to be as dark as I can get it, so I'm really focusing on building that darkness there. Same with the bottom edge and the right side of that bush. Nice and dark. And then I'm going to start working on pulling out some dark shadows in this ground. So I've almost slipped into detail work here. Almost. Just kind of daubing at it to create a bit of texture. Here, I didn't bother drawing my canvas because I'm going to be doing the color building in the sky, and I'm not going to touch any of that dark paint that I just applied. So just a little bit of medium and a lot of my paint. And I'm going to start really building where I want my sky to be the brightest. I'm not going to cover the entire sky. I love the texture and that greenish, kind of dreamy underwater greenish color that I got around the edges of the trees and everything. So I'm going to leave some of that and just kind of fade into it a little bit. There's no point in doing all of the layers and the glazing if you're just going to obliterate everything. So remember that and keep the thick, heavy paint to just the areas that you want to be really interesting and exciting. And kind of building a little bit of texture in the sky to make it look a bit misty or even a little bit cloudy. So I'm letting some of my brush work remain. I'm just picking up paint. I did not pick up any medium, mostly because, like I said, this color is slightly transparent, but also because I am just trying to build that color in the sky. Can you see up at the very top of my canvas, right in the sky part? You can see quite a bit of the orange showing through. And notice I'm not rushing to get rid of that. I think it's exciting. I think it's fun. Orange is a really interesting contrast to the blue and the green and the teal. So I'm going to let it stay. One thing with underpainting that I think a lot of people have the impression of is that a wild underpainting color is a challenge to make sure that you covered it all at the end of the painting, and that's not the case at all. A little bit more of that slightly transparent color on the ground here, and I'm going to start flicking in some little grass shapes. Like I said, the line between color blocking and detailing here is kind of blurred, and that's why I put them together in one step. Very little paint though. We're going to start building the color on the side of the house, as well as beginning to suggest some of the texture in the wood. Suggestion of a highlight down the side of the roof. And now I'm just full on moving into detail. So a little bit of water. I like to do flicks. Obviously, you are free to ignore this and not do flicks if you don't like it. I just think it's a really easy way to get some kind of, flotsam and jetsam in the air, little bugs flying around, or dried seed heads, or whatever it is, however you want to interpret it. That little bit of texture, I feel like, just makes everything just a little bit more magical. And then I always take my finger that's got the paint on it and streak it into the ground for a little bit more interesting texture work. Gonna make sure that's nice and dry, and we're gonna do a little bit more of the dark. I mixed this color slightly more on the brown side because I'm going to do a bit of spot glazing into the house. And so I wanted the house to have just a bit of a warmer feel to it. So there again is just one more reason why I use a mix of colors for the glazing rather than a single color. Single color, you have no control over it. It's the color that it is. Push that roof into the shadows a little bit. A little more on the blue side here, just a tiny bit of medium. And just make sure that shadow is as dark as it can be, because that's going to be my most interesting area. And look at the edge of the tree, how there's warmth in the outer edges of the trees, even though all we've used on the surface of this painting is blues and greens. It's very warm there. That's because that orange is shining through. And that's what's keeping it from being a flat, boring kind of monochromatic black and white style painting. That warmth on the edge of the tree is adding some interest and some light. Quick glaze of these dark colors on the ground. See, just kind of revisiting all of the steps at this point. Little extra water. I'm going to do some dark splatters too. I feel like whatever I'm going to do with the light, I got to do with the dark. Just mix enough water in until that paint just starts to run a little bit. Nice and dry. And we're going to do just a little bit more building. So pure paint, no medium. I want to get as much of this intense color, pure color in the sky as I can. Still not afraid to overlap because, if it looks weird, a little bit of a glaze where that overlaps will pull it back in. Going to my number 8 bright, a little bit of medium, a little bit of paint. We're going to start detailing the house and the ground. So I'm going to use this kind of split up bright to create some wood grain texture. Keeping the brightest side on that right hand edge so it's right there against my sharp, crisp line. And I didn't put a door on this house because, like I said, I'm trying to keep things a little bit more simple so that we can just focus on the steps. But you can see there's a little spot that's kind of dark on the left-hand side of the face of the house. If I were going to put extra time into this, I would respond to that shape by saying, oh yeah, that looks like kind of a door frame that's kind of broken and old. And I might just darken it and leave the edges of it a little bit organic and broken looking. Onto some grasses, just some little flicks. I know that color is super bright and a little bit aggressive right now, but always remember to think ahead a couple of steps. So what I mean by that is, I know that's too bright. I know that I don't really want it to look like that. It kind of looks like it's floating, but for now it's fine because I can put a glaze over it, and that will help pull it into the scene and kind of dampen down the vibrancy. So for now, I'm just worried about getting my values and my shapes that I want to see. I'm not so worried about, is it too bright? Is it too this, too that? I can get rid of it later if I need to. Clean brush, and I'm going to get my dark colors. And just keep on working the details of grasses and wood grain and flowers and just all of those little textures. Obviously, I'm never afraid to smear paint with my fingertips. All right, moving on to a small round brush. I don't know, this is a 1 or a 2, it doesn't matter. Just a small round brush and just working in those fine details. My nice dark shadows under the eaves of the house, streaking it down into the boards. When I break out these little round brushes, you know the painting is almost done. Just tiny bits of medium here and there kind of helps re-wet that paint, and streak it. lean that color a little more on the brown side. Just keeps that vibrancy, that warmth in the wood of the house. And we'll start working some of it into the ground for some grasses, because remember, like I said, what you do with the dark, you should do with the light. When it comes to texture, anyway, when you're trying to build texture, that's, I have found to be the best way. Right into that blue, no medium. Really popping the brightest bits on the edge of this house. If it's going to be my focal point where I really want people to look, it has to be nice and vibrant. It's got to have something interesting to look at. Good little blob right on the tip of my brush. I'm going to start working where I want a moon to be in the sky. So I want that area to be very opaque. I don't want any of that background color showing through right here. Going straight into my Titan Violet Pale. You can just use titanium white if you don't have this color. I actually had a yellow that was a very, very pale yellow like this one, and I have lost it, so I don't know where it is, but I probably would have used yellow instead, so it really doesn't matter what color you use. That paint is still wet, so this pink is kind of mixing into it, and that's exactly what I wanted here. Nice soft edges, and I'm going to kind of pull some of this mixture out into the sky so it gets a bit of a kind of an interesting streaky glow. But really experiment here and just find your own technique. How do you want this moon or sun or whatever it is to you? How do you want it to look? Where do you want your light to move, or your brightest point of your light to be? Just kind of experiment with it. Just picked up medium there because it'll re-wet what's already on the canvas and just kind of smear what's in my brush still. Okay, so that is the end of our color building and detailing section. Again, I would like for you to stop this video and go work on yours. Spend time in there and really build up those details and those colors, and keep taking notes about the process and how you would change the process to suit your needs in future paintings. And then when you're ready, come back and we will finish up. All right, now we're going to move on to the last two steps, and that's adjusting and final touches. So in the adjusting phase, you basically incorporate all of the steps that we've already gone through. So you might find that you need to make changes to your composition or your colors, the shape of an element, add an element, bump up the details, whatever it is you feel like you need to do. Go back through the steps that we've already done and decide which one is going to help you, or which combination of steps is going to help you make the final changes that you need. And it may only be one or two. It may be practically a repainting of the entire painting. Whatever it is you feel like you need, go ahead and go through all of your adjustments now. When you're done with that, we'll move on to the final touches. And the final touches, it's really just a couple of things. So if there's a spot that you want to be really, really vibrant and just have a little extra punch, that's going to be a final touch. So the moon in the sky, I want it to have a very bright, thick edge to it. That's going to be a final touch. To reflect that moon in the sky, I'm going to put an even brighter pop in just a key place or two on my house to reflect that color that I've put in the moon. That's going to be a final touch. But then there is the most important final touch of all, and that is your signature. So let's go ahead and jump in and see how I make adjustments to this painting as well as the final touches. So my canvas is dry. I am going back up to a slightly larger brush and mixing up a transparent version of my sky color because I felt like I needed to incorporate that glow into the sky a bit more and maybe add just a little extra texture into kind of the cloudy feeling of the sky. Now my sky is nice and bright, really dynamic with some texture and shapes, more of a fluid movement to it than it had before. Kind of a final touch here, just a punch of that violet. It's pretty thick. It's thicker and has a little bit more physical texture to it than the rest of the paint that I've been using. I'm just going to blend the back edge of it back with a little bit of that blue. Just a little matte medium into that mixture that was on my brush. And I'm going to add hints of that brightness to my house here in a couple of key places. So I didn't really make a lot of adjustments to my painting. I didn't feel like I really had too much to adjust. I'm sure if I were painting it for myself, I'd probably spend a bit of time in adjustment, and I might cut into the shape of that big tree and just make it a little bit smaller or shorten the bush on the right hand side a little bit more. But other than that, I was pretty satisfied with the overall composition. Going into my dark color with that same small round brush, really punching the shadow in that under the eave there. As well as I'm going to use this opportunity to build just a bit more texture, just a tiny bit more texture, in the wood planks. And that can be accomplished very easily just by kind of skittering like a couple of little lines just straight down from the top. Just like that. And the ultimate final touch is, of course, the signature. All right, friends, I hope that this was helpful for you. I will include the list of steps in the video description as well, but please remember, try this out a couple of times, whether you do the exact same painting with different colors or, change it up, whatever. Try my process as closely as you can, at least a few times. As you go through it, take notes, like actually write down notes. This step, it would make sense to me if I did it this way instead of this way, or maybe I'll rearrange these steps or not even do this one, whatever that is. I'd like for you to start being able to identify a very specific process for you, because that's going to help you, like I said before, know where to start. That way you can look at an image you want to paint and you're like, oh, okay, what color of underpainting am I going to use? How am I going to make my darks? How am I going to make my lights? And then you can just get started and you know exactly where to start. You know exactly how to achieve your painting. Please feel free to post any part of your process or questions that you have, anything. Post that in our Discord server. If you're not on our Discord server, I really, really recommend that you get there. It's a really great way that we can share information with each other as well as images. If you just cannot or do not want to get on Discord for whatever, you can post comments and questions in the video comments or on one of my posts on the community tab. Unfortunately, you can't share images that way, but if you have a question, I will do my best to get an answer for you. So I hope that you enjoyed this. I hope that it was insightful and helpful. And please let me know if you need any other information. Also, I know I just kind of skimmed over color theory. That's a big part of how I decide what colors to use. So if you would like a big color theory lesson, let me know. And I've been working on one on and off for a couple of years. So maybe that'll be the kick in the pants. I need to get that done and get that out to you. So great. Thanks for watching, everybody. And I will see you again soon.